The night Maeve Callahan almost spilled her entire tray of coffee on the most dangerous man in Boston, she was thinking about rent. Not survival, not danger. Rent. Specifically the $1,847 she didn't have. The landlord who absolutely did not take excuses, and the double shift she'd just pulled at Mass General that had left her feet aching so badly she could feel her pulse in her heels. She was moving too fast through the lobby of the Whitmore Hotel, short-cutting through like she always did on the way to the T station, when she rounded the corner near the elevator bank and nearly walked straight into a wall of black wool coat. She stopped herself, barely. The tray tilted. 3 cups of coffee from the hotel cafe she'd grabbed for the nurses on night shift. She caught it with both hands, pressed it flat against her chest and looked up. The man standing in front of her didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't apologize, even though he'd been the one who'd moved into her path. He just looked at her. Dark eyes, jaw set, the kind of stillness that didn't belong to someone who'd grown up ordinary. He was maybe 35, 36. Tall, the coat was expensive, so was the watch. So was the way the 2 men flanking him immediately positioned themselves between her and him, one hand each disappearing inside their jackets. Maeve froze. Not because of the men. Not even because of the guns she was absolutely certain were under those jackets. She froze because she recognized him, not personally, from the news, from the kind of articles that ran in the Globe under headlines with words like alleged and sources close to the investigation and no charges filed. The man standing 2 feet away from her, studying her with the calm detachment of someone who had never once in his life needed to hurry, was Callum Vane. And Callum Vane was, depending on who you asked, either a legitimate real estate developer with extensive charitable interests in the Southie community, or the man who controlled every moving piece of organized crime between Charlestown and Quincy. "You're blocking the elevator," he said. His voice was low, not threatening. Just a statement of fact, the way someone might say it's raining, or the bridge is out. Maeve stepped aside. She told herself later that she didn't say anything because she was tired, because she had 3 coffees balanced in her hands and sore feet and 17 hours of nursing shifts sitting on her shoulders. She told herself it had nothing to do with the way he'd looked at her. Not with the dismissiveness she'd expected, but with something almost like curiosity. The way you'd look at something unexpected that appeared in a place it had no business being. She told herself a lot of things that turned out not to be true. She saw him again 3 days later. Same hotel lobby, different time of night. She wasn't supposed to be there at all. She'd just come in out of the rain while waiting for her rideshare, buying herself 2 minutes under an awning that wasn't technically public. The Whitmore's doorman knew her by now, mostly because she'd treated his daughter in the ER 8 months ago, and he'd never forgotten it. Callum Vane was sitting in one of the lobby chairs near the window, alone. No coat, no bodyguards in sight, though she'd bet everything she didn't have that they were nearby. He had a phone in his hand, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking out at the rain, and he had the expression of a man doing math in his head. Not numbers, but consequences. The kind of calculations that didn't have clean answers. She should have walked to the other side of the lobby. Instead, she went to the front desk to ask for an umbrella loan. The hotel kept a rack of them for guests. And on the way back, she passed close enough to his chair that he looked up. He recognized her immediately. She could tell by the way his attention sharpened. "Coffee girl," he said. "Nurse," she corrected before she could stop herself. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, more like the blueprint of one. "You're not a guest here." "Neither are you, I'm guessing. You look like you own it." That was the moment she should have kept walking. She knew it even as she said it. The particular feeling of a line being crossed. The air pressure change of a door opening that maybe shouldn't. But Callum Vane tilted his head slightly and said, "Sit down. You're dripping on the marble." She sat down. She didn't know why. She was tired and the chair was right there. And she was 29 years old, and she'd spent the last 4 years of her life being careful and responsible, and always moving in the right direction. And sometimes the body just stops cooperating with the brain, and does the interesting thing instead. You work at the hospital, he said, not a question. Mass General, trauma unit. She set the umbrella across her knees. You have a problem with that. I have a lot of problems. That's not one of them. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the rain was heavy enough to blur the streetlights into halos. Maeve watched a cab crawl down Tremont and thought about the fact that she was sitting next to Callum Vane in a hotel lobby at 11:30 on a Tuesday, and that her mother would have absolutely lost her mind. Your hands are shaking, he said. She looked down. He was right. Not badly. Not the kind of shaking anyone would notice unless they were paying attention. But he was paying attention. Low blood sugar, she said. I forgot to eat again. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a protein bar. Still in the wrapper. He set it on the arm of her chair without comment, the way you'd leave a glass of water for someone. Matter of fact, no ceremony. She stared at it. I'm not going to apologize for it, he said. I wasn't going to ask you to. She picked it up and tore it open. Peanut butter. She ate half of it in 2 bites because she really was that hungry, and somewhere around the 3rd month of her nursing career, she'd lost the ability to be embarrassed about basic human needs in front of strangers. Thank you. Don't mention it, her rideshare notification came through. She stood, tucked the other half of the bar into her scrub's pocket and held out the umbrella. He didn't take it. Keep it. The rain doesn't bother me. She walked out into the wet night and didn't look back, and she thought, that was nothing. That was a coincidence. That was a tired woman in a lobby, and a man who happened to have a protein bar. She was wrong about that too. The 3rd time she saw him, someone was trying to kill him. She'd been coming off a night shift, walking to her car in the parking structure on Fruit Street, when she heard it. Not the sound of a gun, not yet, but the sound that comes before. The particular quality of silence that descends when men who mean harm have gotten into position. She'd grown up in Southie. She knew that silence the way she knew the smell of antiseptic and the weight of a chart. She knew it in her bones. She dropped behind a concrete pillar without thinking. 2 black SUVs blocked the exit ramp. 4 men on foot moving in from the stairwell side. And in the middle of the structure, standing next to a silver Audi, was Callum Vane. One of his bodyguards already down on the ground, the other moving to put himself in front of Callum, with the practiced efficiency of a man who had trained for exactly this. Maeve had exactly 4 seconds to make a decision. She made it. She grabbed her phone, killed the screen brightness, and texted the only number she could think of. Tommy, her brother, who ran with people she'd spent her whole adult life, pretending she didn't know. Parking structure, Fruit Street. Now. Tell whoever needs to know. She didn't wait for a response. She moved. Not toward the exit. Toward the electrical panel she'd noticed 3 weeks ago, when she'd reported a flickering light to the structure management and the maintenance guy had left the service door open. She'd filed that detail away the same way she filed away everything. Medication interactions, discharge instructions, the precise angle at which a patient's blood pressure dropped when they were about to code. Maeve Callahan had always been good at noticing things that other people didn't think mattered. The panel was exactly where she remembered. She pulled the main circuit for levels 3 and 4. The lights went out. In the darkness and the shouting that followed, Callum Vane did not run. She heard him moving, controlled, purposeful, and she did something she would not be able to explain to anyone for the rest of her life. She crossed to where the sound was, reached out in the black, found the sleeve of his coat, and said very quietly, "Stairwell B, 20 seconds." He didn't ask questions. She would think about that later. The fact that he trusted her immediately, in the dark, knowing nothing about her except that she existed. He just moved. They made it to the stairwell. She pulled the door shut behind them, and they stood in the fire exit dark, breathing, listening to the controlled chaos 2 floors above. "You killed the lights," he said. "I did. You knew where the panel was. I report maintenance issues." A beat of silence. "Who are you?" "Maeve Callahan." "I'm a nurse." Another silence, longer. She could feel him looking at her even though she couldn't see his face. "Callahan," he said very carefully, "as in Michael Callahan's daughter. The temperature in the stairwell seemed to drop 10 degrees. "He died when I was 12, she said. "I don't know anything about that world." "That's not what I asked." Her jaw tight-sighed. Out somewhere above them, she could hear the sound of vehicles. "Help arriving. Whose help? She didn't know yet. What did you ask?" "Nothing yet," Callum Vane said quietly. "But I'm going to." Michael Callahan had been, depending on who you asked, a union organizer from Southie with a temper and a talent for loyalty, or one of the 3 men who had built the original framework of organized labor racketeering in the greater Boston port system before the Vane family absorbed it. Maeve had grown up hearing the first story. She'd spent her adult life slowly, reluctantly, piecing together the second. She hadn't told anyone what she knew, not her mother, not Tommy, not any of the various people over the years who had suggested, with varying degrees of gentleness, that her father's legacy was something she might want to understand better. She'd become a nurse instead. She'd moved to a clean apartment in JP. She'd paid her loans on time. She'd kept her head down and her hands steady, and she had been so careful for so long about not becoming anything her father had been. And then she had pulled a circuit panel in a parking structure and put her hand on Callum Vane's sleeve in the dark. His men found them in the stairwell 4 minutes later. She waited for the moment when they'd take her phone, tell her to go home, make it clear she was a liability. Instead, Callum told one of them to get her car brought around and told another to give her his number. "In case of what?" she asked. "In case you need it." He was already moving toward the exit, 2 of his men reforming around him. At the door, he paused without turning around. "Your father used to say that the smartest people in any room are the ones nobody notices." She didn't say anything. "He was talking about himself," Callum added, "but I think he was wrong about who he meant." Then he was gone, and she stood in the stairwell holding a business card with nothing on it but a phone number, thinking about her father, thinking about rent, thinking about the way Callum Vane's voice had changed, just fractionally, just at the edges, when he'd said Michael Callahan's name. He called her 3 days later. Not the number on the card, he called her cell, which meant he'd found it, which meant she should have been alarmed. She wasn't. She'd been half expecting it. "I need a favor," he said without introduction. "I'm a trauma nurse, Mr. Vane, not a mob doctor. One of my men took a knife across his ribs 2 nights ago. He won't go to a hospital." She closed her eyes, opened them. "Why?" "Because there are 2 detectives who would very much like to know where he's been. I'm a mandatory reporter, I know. That's why I'm asking you and not someone else." A pause. "He's 23 years old. He has a kid." She hated that he'd said that. She hated that it worked. "Text me the address," she said. The man's name was Danny. He was exactly 23, slight, with the particular wariness of someone who had grown up expecting bad things to happen and had not yet been surprised. The wound was worse than she'd been told. Knife had caught the lower edge of the 4th rib. Not deep enough to puncture the lung, but close, with the beginning of infection that would have gone septic inside of 48 hours if she hadn't come. She worked for 2 hours. Callum sat on the other side of the room and watched her. Not hovering, just present, the way someone sits when they're in a place they feel responsible for. When she finished, she washed her hands at the kitchen sink and said, without turning around, "He needs oral antibiotics. I'll call in the prescription under my own name. If anyone asks, he's a patient I've been treating for a post-surgical complication. Don't use him for anything physical for at least 3 weeks. Okay, I'm not doing this again." "Okay," Callum said again in the same tone, which was not the tone of a man who believed her. She turned around. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his hands folded, and there was something in his face that she hadn't seen there before. Not the calculation, not the stillness, but something that looked uncomfortably like respect. "What?" she said. "Your hands don't shake when you work." "No, they don't. You're not afraid of blood. I'm a trauma nurse. You're not afraid of this." He gestured, a small, contained movement that somehow managed to encompass the apartment, Danny unconscious on the couch, the whole weight of what she'd just done. "Most people are." Maeve looked at him for a long moment. "My father wasn't afraid of it either," she said. I used to think that was a flaw. And now I think it depends on what you do with it. She picked up her bag. Don't call me again. She was in her car and 4 blocks away before she admitted to herself, quietly and without ceremony, that she was already waiting for him to. He didn't call for 2 weeks. Long enough that she almost convinced herself it was over, that she'd been a useful stranger and nothing more. She went back to her shifts, her routine, the particular small satisfactions of a life built carefully. A patient who went home after 3 weeks in the ICU, a good read at the cafe on Center Street, a Sunday phone call with her mother in which she said nothing about any of it. Then Tommy called. Her brother was 3 years older, built like their father, and had the specific quality of a man who had been making bad decisions for so long that he'd gotten very good at surviving them. She loved him with the exhausting completeness of someone who has accepted that they cannot fix another person. I need to see you, he said, and she could tell from his voice that it was bad. She met him at the park near the old house. He looked terrible, the particular kind of terrible that isn't about sleep. He sat down on the bench next to her and stared at his hands. I got into something, he said. She waited. There's a guy, Aldrich Morrow. He runs product through the port. He approached me 6 months ago, said he needed someone who knew the logistics side. He stopped. I know what you're going to say. I'm not going to say anything yet. Tell me the rest. He wants me to set up Callum Vane. Tommy's voice dropped. Use my access to flag a shipment. Make it look like Vane's people are moving it. Federal tip lands in the right inbox. Vane goes down. Morrow takes over the whole operation. Maeve sat very still. The park was quiet. A dog barked somewhere across the green. And if you don't, she said, then he uses what he knows about me to put me away. I've got priors, Maeve. From 5 years ago he found them. She stared at the middle distance. Her mind was already moving. Not emotionally, not yet, but in the clean, precise way it moved when a patient came in crashing and there were 3 things happening at once, and she had to sequence them correctly or someone died. Morrow wanted to frame Vane. Morrow had leverage on Tommy. Tommy had come to her, which meant Tommy already understood, somewhere under the panic, that she had access Morrow didn't know about. Her father's daughter, she thought. No matter how far she ran. Don't say yes to Morrow, she said. Don't say no either. Stall him. Tell him you need more time to get the access codes. Tommy. She looked at him. Trust me. She called Callum that night. He answered on the 2nd ring, which meant he'd been watching his phone, which meant he'd been thinking about her. She filed that away too. I need to meet, she said. When? Tonight. He sent a car. She didn't ask where they were going, and the driver didn't say, which she was starting to understand was just how this world operated. Direction given in implication, destinations understood without being stated. They ended up in a building in Fort Point she'd never been to, a floor that looked like it had been an architect's office at some point, and had been repurposed into something that defied easy category. Callum was there with 2 men she hadn't seen before. He looked at her face when she walked in and immediately told the 2 men to leave. She told him everything. Tommy, Morrow, the shipment, the frame. She watched him while she talked, watching the calculation move behind his eyes, the way he processed information like someone rearranging pieces on a board she couldn't fully see. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. How long have you known about Morrow? She asked. Long enough to know he's been a problem I haven't solved yet. He came to you through my brother because he thought it was subtle. It's not subtle. No, she met his eyes. He doesn't know that I know you. Callum looked at her for a long moment. What are you suggesting, Maeve? She'd thought about this on the way over. About the kind of woman she'd been trying not to be, and the kind of woman who apparently lived inside that version anyway, patient, and waiting, and knowing things and noticing things and ready in the dark. Let Tommy give him the access codes, she said. Real ones. But the shipment he flags, it's going to be the wrong one. You move your people out, Morrow moves his people in, and then whoever you need to call makes the call. You want to use your brother as bait. I want to use Morrow's own trap against him. Tommy's not bait. Tommy's the mechanism. There's a difference. Callum stood up from the table and moved to the window. Boston at night, the harbor lights, the particular dark of water under sky. He stood there for a moment and then said, quietly, "Your father built that port infrastructure. I know. He died protecting it. I know that too." He turned around. "And you never wanted any of this." "No." She held his gaze. "But I'm good at it, which seems to matter more than what I want." Something moved across his face. Complicated, real. The first thing she'd seen from him that wasn't controlled. He crossed back to the table and sat down across from her, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. Two people who had arrived at the same place from completely different directions. "All right," he said. "We do it your way." It took 11 days to set up. Tommy fed Morrow the access codes. Maeve helped him rehearse the conversations, coaching him the way she coached panicking family members through procedures, calm and specific, step by step. She didn't tell him the full shape of what they were doing because Tommy was a good liar but a bad actor, and Morrow would see it if he knew too much. She met with Callum 4 more times during those 11 days. 3 of the meetings were logistical, mapping out timing, contingencies, who needed to move when. The 4th was not logistical. That one happened at the Fort Point building late on a Thursday, after everyone else had gone, and they sat across from each other with coffee getting cold between them, and talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with Morrow or shipments or port access codes, about her mother's apartment in Southie, still full of her father's books, about the particular loneliness of being the one in a family who went legitimate, about what it meant to be careful for so long that you forgot what you were protecting. She didn't let herself think too hard about those 3 hours. The night the trap closed, she was at the hospital, her shift, her hands doing exactly what they were trained to do, in exactly the place they belonged. Her phone vibrated at 2:47 a.m. One message from Callum, no words, just. She stood in the hallway outside the supply room and let herself breathe for the first time in 11 days. Aldrich Morrow was arrested at the port at 3:10 a.m. with his own product and his own people, and a wire transfer on his phone that confirmed everything federal investigators had been building toward for 2 years. The case did not involve Tommy. Tommy's name appeared nowhere. Callum had made sure of it, and she had not asked him how. Some things you accept without the full accounting. She didn't see him for a week after that. Long enough for the adrenaline to settle, for her body to remember what it felt like to sleep, for the specific post-crisis flatness to come and then pass. When he showed up at Mass General, he was not there as a patient. He was standing in the lobby in his coat with a coffee carrier, 4 cups, and he looked faintly uncertain in a way she had never once seen on his face before. She crossed the lobby toward him. "You can't be here," she said. "I brought coffee. Callum." "I know," he held out one of the cups. "I have something to tell you, and I didn't want to do it on the phone." She took the coffee. They moved to a corner near the window out of the way of the foot traffic. "The Callahan Holdings," he said. "Your father's stake in the port infrastructure. The real stake, not the public record. When he died, it didn't go to your mother. He put it in a trust, structured so it would transfer on certain conditions." He paused. "You met the conditions." She stared at him. 12 years ago, when you turned 18, a portion activated. It's been sitting in a holding company. When you did what you did, with the shipment, with Morrow." He stopped. "There are lawyers. The paperwork is legitimate. You have access to something that's been waiting for you for a long time." The lobby noise continued around them. Somewhere a phone was ringing. Somewhere an elevator announced its arrival. "He knew," she said. "Not a question. He built it for someone who would know what to do with it without being told." Maeve looked down at the coffee cup in her hands. She thought about her father's books still in her mother's apartment. She thought about the girl who had gone to nursing school and paid her loans on time and been so careful for so long. She thought about the parking structure and the dark, and the moment she'd reached out and found the sleeve of a coat that belonged to a man who had immediately trusted her direction. She thought about the fact that she had not been afraid. She looked up at Callum Vane. "I'm still a nurse," she said. "I know. That doesn't change. I know that too." She looked at him for another moment, this man who had handed her a protein bar in a hotel lobby without apology, who had trusted her voice in the dark, who had built a trap with her the way two people build something together, who have always known how, even if they didn't know each other yet. "You should have told me sooner," she said. "I wasn't sure you'd stay if I did." That was honest. She respected honest, especially from men who had every reason to be otherwise. "I'm going back to my shift," she said. "Don't come here again without calling first. Okay. And drink your coffee before it goes cold." She turned toward the corridor. "You paid too much for it." She heard something behind her that she was almost certain was a real laugh. Quiet, surprised, like something that had gotten out before he could manage it. She walked back to her patients, her hands steady, her mind clear, her father's city spread below the hospital windows in all its complicated dark and light, waiting.